some reason, they claim it's not economic advantage, but for some reason they've decided to go against hundreds of years of tradition on this island and the deeply held religious convictions of many, many people, including, of course, their own customers who are really grieved by this decision. We come obviously from the standpoint that a day of rest is effectively mandatory. It's a human right, along with the other 10 commandments which have undergirded our moral and legal fabric in society. It actually enshrines the human right to a day of rest. And of course, in the UK, that's been eroded for many, many years. Incidentally, it's still far more respected on the continent. But for us here, the Sabbath or the day of rest has been very, very important. It's not just what we do, it's who we are. And for some reason, Tesco have decided just to go against that.
And Reverend Stewart, we were actually talking about this earlier, how in European countries, I mean, even in France, which is a secular country, still very few shops will open on a Sunday.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. It's been another busy week in Westminster. Earlier this week, I sat down with the leader of the Conservative Party, Camilla Badenoch, for an exclusive interview. We cover everything from migration caps, the ECHR, Nigel Farage, of course, and her recent trip to the US. You won't want to miss it. Labour MP for Brent West, Barry Gardiner, will join me. I'm going to be asking him whether Wes Streeting was right to criticise Ed Miliband over his failure to back military action in Syria in 2013. We'll also reflect on 5 months of Labour in government, and of course I'll have to ask Barry Gardiner about the Chinese spying scandal. Reform UK Chairman Zia Youssef will be live in the studio. I'll be getting his reaction to my interview with Camilla Badenoch. Is she right to say that Reform UK is just a Nigel Farage fan club? And historian and author Alexander Larman will be here to talk about his new documentary on the relationship between Edward VIII and George VI. I'll also see what he makes of the Duke of York's role in the MI5 investigation into that Chinese spy. We've got 90 minutes of punchy British politics to come, including that exclusive interview with Camilla Badenoch, so don't go anywhere. Right, let's delve into the Sunday papers this morning with my Telegraph colleague, parliamentary sketch writer Madeline Grant. Madeline, lovely to see you.
Morning, Camilla.
You're looking suitably Christmassy, actually,
yes,
with your red and white festive jumper.
Absolutely.
Lovely to see you. Let's get straight in on the theme of something red. I'm thinking Chinese flags. I'm thinking, why has another Chinese spy been able to not just infiltrate, it seems, Parliament, but also royal circles? We'll get on to the Duke of York aspect in a minute. But the Times has got this extraordinary image of this person who is only known as H6.
Yes.
It's all very James Bond, isn't it?
Yes.
Photographed not only with David Cameron, but also with Theresa May.
Yeah, perhaps there's a touch of the Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy there too. It's a pretty damning story. I mean, I think that quite apart from the revelations about Prince Andrew, and I think obviously we've known for a very, very long time that he's got terrible political judgment and that the King was quite right to try and ostracise him as much as he has. But also I think it's very important that we remember that, you know, this is not just an Andrew problem.
No. As
the Sunday Times makes very clear in this reporting, this goes to the heart of the British establishment. You know, there are many tainted institutions beyond Prince Andrew in his role in the royal family. There's, you know, the ancient universities, big business, and in fact politicians, because as the Sunday Times point out, this spy was able to meet with both David Cameron and Theresa May.
Yes. Look, many people meet with Theresa May and David Cameron and any other Prime Minister, right? OK, so they're kind of caught on camera. You could pose up with a number of different people. But what this speaks to, Madeleine, is this idea of the Chinese having a huge amount of cash and therefore a huge amount of influence. Under the Cameron era, we know it was kind of, let's all be completely pro-China and let's bring Xi Jinping in and all the rest of it. That has actually continued a bit with the Labour government. They've talked about resurfacing these ties and everything. But, with China sort of circling Taiwan and everything going on and all of Donald Trump's warnings, seems rather out of kilter to be courting the Chinese right now. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the golden age of Chinese-British relations under David Cameron, the golden era, as they called it, was obviously a terrible strategic mistake. But at the very least, you can argue that this was before the Uyghur genocide. This happened before COVID, lest we forget, which very much came out of China. And I think, given what we now know, to have any continuation of that policy looks unbelievably foolhardy. I think we need to be more serious as treating China as a potentially existential threat rather than a country that we can have kind of normal relations with. To be fair to him, the only politician that's been consistent on this is Ian Duncan Smith. Along the way, I mean, he's been sanctioned by Beijing, like a lot of other politicians. I think Tom Tugendhat was being sanctioned by the Chinese. But on Andrew, just very briefly, is it time for the Duke of York to just become a private citizen? Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one because his sources are saying, hang on a minute, he was not aware and he has been used as a kind of pawn in this Chinese spy's game. And we get that, but he's a liability for the king, isn't he? Well, he is, but beyond appearing at the Christmas walkabout, I'm not really sure what exactly he has. Well, he's still living in Royal Lodge, It's true, but it's not being bankrolled by the royal family, is it? Or I don't know. I mean, you'll know more about this. There's talk now he might not appear at the walkabout in Sandringham, which would probably be a bit harsh. The Duchess of York has been invited along in previous years. She's had a difficult year because she's had a double cancer diagnosis. Who knows? Let's move on to the next story, which is on the front of the Mail on Sunday. We're calling it Starmer's EU sellout. Starmer has got a surrender squad planning to undo Brexit with some of these talks with the EU. Just explain it to us, Matt. Yes, absolutely. This is the story that the Prime Minister has assembled a kind of pretty significant-sized department to essentially to renegotiate Brexit. They call it to reset our relations with the EU. Some fear that this is done with the aim of ultimately rejoining the EU. Lord Frost, in fact, who was served as the trade negotiator previously, said that more people than he was given to negotiate the initial deal have been seconded to this department. So it's like 100 civil servants or something in that region. And it's interesting to me because, whatever your views on Brexit, and I very much understand why many people feel it hasn't been a success, not least because having unequivocally said many times that they wanted migration to be lower, it reached unprecedented levels under Boris Johnson. So I do understand that. But I do think that it's interesting that this is all happening at a time when, things are not going particularly well economically in the EU. No, the EU seems to be the euro seems to be in great turmoil and, of course, political instability as well. Olaf Scholz on his knees, Emmanuel Macron about to be turfed out of the Élysée Palace. Exactly, and it also does slightly beg the question of, what are the concessions that Starmer and co might have to offer on the UK part in order to get this more seamless relationship that they want. What are they going to have to concede to Brussels going backwards? Also, there's an interesting piece in the Sunday Times talking about Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, being the new Queen of Europe, which made me inwardly chuckle. She had a very close relationship, believe it or not, with Rishi Sunak. Yes, she did. They kept on hanging out together because they were the same age and both from the right. And I just thought to myself, Starmer and Meloni will have very, very little in common if she is indeed the Queen of Europe, that he really needs to negotiate with. I actually think she is the Queen of Europe to an extent. It's extraordinary. Can you imagine a couple of years ago if somebody said that the most stable country politically in the EU is Italy? I know, but it just goes to show if you have robust leadership and somebody that sticks to their principles and values, and she's made huge strides with trying to reduce immigration, particularly into Lampedusa and around the Italian coast, then, it pays dividends. And I tell you what, if she doesn't like Starmer, it will be very obvious because she has the worst poker face that I've ever seen. No, that's the video of her meeting Macron is something extraordinary. And also just looking at Joe Biden, with an eye raise, going, what the hell is he doing? No, we like Meloni because she's, I suppose, bringing girl power back to the European stage. Racist doctors row. This is about Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, vowing to root out NHS anti-Semitism. Do you know what? We've done quite a few stories about this, haven't we, on The Telegraph? And it's on the front page of The Telegraph. I've heard anecdotally from a number of Jewish doctors saying that some of the stuff that's posted on these kind of medical WhatsApp and other groups, social media groups, is absolutely appalling.
Absolutely. What strikes me about this story is that, I think it's Wes Streeting. He's one of the few, I think, frontbench ministers who is routinely bringing in some kind of positive headlines for Labour at the moment. Last week it was banning puberty blockers, something that was welcomed by, I think, a vast majority of people in the country.
Yeah.
And this week, he's saying that people should not be bringing their political views to bear when they're performing medical care. Now, to me, this is like the most uncontroversial thing imaginable. It's simply upholding the Hippocratic Oath.
Yes.
But I think the fact that he has to say it, that he has to insist upon it, just shows how far the termites have spread, the difficult situation that we're in.
It's quite brave from him because he had quite a lot of problems in Ilford North, where he's the constituency MP from Islamic extremists, sort of making his life very difficult during the election campaign. He's got a point, though, because we read on the Mail on Sunday that there's now a probe into the BMA, the British Medical Association's president, because of her tweets on Gaza. Apparently she's been tweeting things about... Let me just have a look at this story now. Tweeting things that appear to be, extremely pro-Palestinian.
Yeah.
And possibly incendiary remarks that might be seen by some Jews as not really being in accordance with her presumably impartial role at the head of the BMA. I stress she's under investigation, but...
Absolutely.
Well, extraordinary. And do we think that Wes Streeting's got his eye on a higher prize here? There is another piece in the Sunday Times talking about him. I've always described him as the most ambitious man in the Labour Party, and now suggestions, will Keir Starmer go the distance? And if he doesn't, they're not talking about Rachel Reeves and they're not talking about Angela Rayner, they're talking about Wes Streeting.
Well, I think Rachel Reeves, being the architect of such an unpopular budget, is now heavily tainted herself. Whatever criticism is levied at Keir Starmer could equally be levied at her.
Yes.
Angela Rayner, she's had some pretty catastrophic interviews recently. I think there would be some people in Labour who would think...
Not on this channel. She won't come on.
Oh, really?
She's too busy.
Oh, I see.
But
Even
we're quite happy to have you on,
Sky.
Deputy Prime Minister. Do please accept a grilling. Just want straight answers to straight questions. It's really not that hard. It should be fine because you're second in command to the Prime Minister.
Yeah, good point.
But also, she keeps on being moved off her own brief. So she had the workers' plan taken away from her by the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds. And then this week, all of the stuff on housing... Yeah. Suddenly it was taken off
Matthew Pennycook.
Matthew Pennycook.
The housing minister.
Who I was calling Matthew Poppycock at one point and realised I'd got his name wrong.
But he was an impressive, knowledgeable guy.
He did very well on the broadcast round.
I agree. But I just think that this is not a great endorsement of your deputy leader, is it?
No. Let's move on. Now, you wanted to do this story because the Mail on Sunday reports that Eton has cut back on places amid Labour's VAT raid. And I think... Madeline, this refers to the places that it offers to parents who couldn't afford the fees, but whose boys show a great deal of academic promise.
Absolutely, the places that are there for people from much more modest backgrounds. And the reason I wanted to draw attention to this story is just that the amount of times before they officially announced the policy or after they immediately announced it, the number of times that people made this point that the first thing to go when you make this VAT change will be the bursaries for disadvantaged pupils. Ironically, disadvantaged pupils who are actually quite similar to Keir Starmer himself, who, as we know, went to, I think it was a grammar school, but while he was there, it became a private school.
That's right.
The local authority paid for him to continue attending while it was a private school. So one of their early moves has been to basically remove opportunities from children who are in exactly that position, and not really to give a damn about the potential unintended consequences of the policy.
Yes.
There's also been a story, I think, that was in the Telegraph this week, that schools in Surrey, after an FOI request, for certain year groups, they're now saying that they have no more state places left whatsoever. So children who leave the private sector, who are displaced, will be unable to be educated in Surrey. And that means that the local council will now have to pay to ferry them to a school further away, which could be unbelievably expensive.
No, we kept on hearing from the Education Secretary on this show, actually, Bridget Phillipson, saying, no, there are plenty of school places. It was like, well, that's not what you've been saying for the last 14 years. You've been talking about school overcrowding. Now we hear that Surrey has run out of places.
Yes.
And do you remember the only person that was big enough to admit that it might cause an exodus?
Emily Thornbury.
Emily Thornbury.
And she got into huge trouble for saying the quiet bit out loud there.
What happened to her? She wasn't offered a place in the cabinet, although, to be fair, she is the chair now of
the Foreign Affairs Select Committee.
So she hasn't done too badly, Emily Thornbury,
Yes.
but she was the only one to admit that this would result, funny enough, in private school pupils ending up in state schools. And you're right, Madeleine. I mean, you know, to be disadvantaging pupils on bursaries to Eton probably doesn't seem right. And there's a story. I'm going to ask Barry Gardner about this in just a moment, actually, because there's also a story about military families saying, look, we might actually leave the military if we can't get private school.
Again, people made this point many times and they didn't seem at all interested.
Nobody listens.
Because I felt that this was a policy that really had more to do with vengeance and vindictiveness than it had to do with actually raising money.
Yeah.
At many people pointed out areas where you might actually end up, you know, losing money with the displacement into the state sector and so on. But it's not really something that seems to be of interest to Bridget Phillipson and her team.
Madeleine Grant, thank you very much. Are you sketching this week? Have we still got some Parliament to go?
Oh, yes, alas. I've got to sketch the great repetitive episode that is PMQs on Wednesday.
Christmas PMQs to come. Madeleine Grant, thank you very much indeed for your help with the papers this morning. Coming up next, as I say, I've got that interview with Barry Gardner, and I'm also going to be asking him about the Chinese spy scandal, because don't forget, he became unstuck when he accepted £600,000 from somebody who turned out to be a Chinese spy. Don't go anywhere.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
3 incredible young people from Essex are planning to become the youngest people ever to row, not sail, row, across the Atlantic Ocean.
It's about for 3,000 miles.
It is.
Give or take.
Almost exactly that, Sam.
The 3 flying fish, so-called, consists of Anna, Dunk, Harry, Alan and Rowan Daly, who are preparing to row that 3,000 miles across the Atlantic. It would be the 2nd largest ocean in the world, and the trio are aiming to do that challenge in support of the Teenage Cancer Trust.
Well, I'm very pleased to say that Anna and Harry from the Flying Fish join us now. Very good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
I think the two of you are bonkers, but brilliant. Absolutely incredible what you're doing to raise money for Teenage Cancer Trust. Why did you want to do this?
So our third person, Rowan, his friend actually died. So when he was in secondary school, I believe, one of his peers passed away, and Teenage Cancer Trust supported them and their family a lot. So it was definitely the right charity. Yeah, it was.
Absolutely awful. So you wanted to do something to raise money for teenage cancer. Why rowing?
So my dad did it in 2021.
The trip, the Atlantic trip?
Yeah, he rowed it as a pair. Where we live in Essex, they actually build the boats there. So we used to cycle round there past the boatyard, and he got interested and actually did it. He was the first year after COVID. And one night, we all met in the Air Cadets, so one night after Air Cadets, Rowan actually dropped me off home, and the boat was outside. We were obviously waiting to get it sold. And I think he was asking some questions, and we stood there at my porch and went, Rowan said, I reckon we could do that. And I was like, yeah, I reckon we could. And then we brought Harry on board, and that's kind of how it all came together.
If people are watching and they want to support you, do you have a
GoFundMe
we've got
social media platforms at the Free Flying Fish. That's Facebook, Instagram and TikTok, and our GoFundMe links in all of the bios on there.
Fantastic.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. We're just waiting for Barry Gardner's line to be cleared. We just had a few technical difficulties, so I'm just going to bring Madeline Grant back into the conversation as we wait for Mr Gardner to come online and speak to us. I was talking to you just before the break about sketching Parliament. I mean, how do you think PMQs has been going for Kemi Badenoch? Because we've got this big interview with her coming up.
Yeah.
I did ask her how she found it and whether she was nervous, and of course she was quite bullish in her response because she's proud of being very direct. How do you think it's gone?
Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I think she's had some good weeks and some...
Finish your thought very quickly, Madeline. I'm going to go to Barry because he's ready.
Good weeks and bad weeks. Last week particularly bad. That's my
she
verdict.
shouldn't have gone in on immigration.
Why would you ignore that the farmers are literally outside Westminster?
I agree. It was a bit of an own goal.
It was.
Right, Barry Gardner is with us, I hope. Mr Gardner, can you hear me all right? The Labour MP for Brent West.
Parliamentary security was blocking me from getting into you.
Barry, I'm glad that parliamentary security is keeping us and your own line safe. Now, let's have a little chat. We were just speaking, Madeline Grant and I, about Labour's VAT on private school fees plan. So we now have military families saying that they might have to leave military service because of this plan. We've got Eton saying it's cancelling its bursaries, which, as you know, help disadvantaged pupils to have private education at that top boys' school. And we've also got Surrey saying we've got no places left in state schools because of the private school exodus. Barry Gardner, you've been around the block a little bit. You know politics very well. This is a disastrous policy that probably should be U-turned on, shouldn't it?
No, not at all, because what it is going to mean is that children starting off school in primary school will start each day with a square meal in their belly. And that is so important, Camilla, because, you know, so many kids actually find it very difficult to concentrate because they haven't had breakfast. They've been hiked out of bed, dashed to the school in the morning, you know, it's been a rush job, and they're hungry and they can't focus. So
Sorry, isn't it a parent's job? Sorry, isn't it a parent's job to give a child breakfast in the morning and not teachers in the schools? What happened to parental responsibility for making sure that children don't go to school hungry?
Camilla, look, you know, if we lived in a perfect world, that would be fine. But in actual fact, at the moment, private schools are getting relief on their taxes, which is because they claim to be charities, but they're not charities, they're businesses. So let's treat them as other businesses. They make money, they do well, that's fine. You know, but let's treat them as businesses and let them say, okay, fine, we will therefore make sure that we pay the correct tax, just like every other business in the country.
Okay. All right, so you're okay with the idea of people leaving the military, even though the armed forces are now at their smallest since the Napoleonic Wars, and you're okay with disadvantaged pupils not being able to get subsidised places at Eton, and you're okay with there being a private school exodus into state schools in Surrey so that they're now overcrowded and oversubscribed. That's all okay?
If I thought that all of those three things were going to happen en masse, then we might have a problem. I don't think that's true.
They've been reported
in fact,
to happen.
If you think that many military families, if they are stationed abroad, their children are paid for in the schools that they go to. Now, there may be some who are not paid for because they choose to go to very expensive schools, but actually, if you need your children to be taken care of and schooled because you're abroad, that's something that is covered by the military. If you're talking about, you know, a mass exodus from private schools, I don't think that's going to happen. And in fact, all the data that we have suggests that it's not, and that the full 20% may not be passed on.
Well, the IFS disagrees and says that there could be an exodus of between 40,000 and 90,000 children. But let's see what happens when the policy comes in January. Barry, do you mind if I ask you about this Chinese spying scandal? Because obviously we know, and it was reported, that you had your own situation with Christine Lee. You accepted 600,000 and you said, I'm very angry that somebody tried to use me in that way, which is similar to some of the language that's been used by sources close to the Duke of York, saying, of course, he had no idea.
Camilla, let's be very clear. In the case of the CRG, that is the China Research Group, which was set up by Tom Tugendhat, which was a conservative think tank, there are two people who have now been charged with offences under the Security Act. Now, those individuals were employed and paid for by the Conservative think tank. In my case, Christine Lee, who had been a friend for many, many years, has not been charged with any offence. She was never been charged with any offence, and in fact, she is now taking MI5 to court for besmirching her good name. Now, on top of that, she wasn't paid for by money from my party or any other party, or indeed by government. She actually paid for people who were members of my staff, who were appointed by me, reported to me, and had no official contact with her whatsoever, in order for me to do a better job for my constituents. So it's a completely different situation. And now we're talking about this person who wants access to Prince Andrew. I don't know the details of that. I know that there have allegations been made which sound as if this is somebody who was trying to seek to ingratiate themselves in some way with people of influence. But we've no more information about who it was or indeed what they were trying to do.
OK, so are you saying you don't think Christine Lee is a Chinese spy?
Well, it's very interesting. I was led to believe that on the day that MI5 issued their warning by MI5. They said she was an agent. They then didn't say she was a spy. After that, the Home Secretary, you'll remember, had to say she was an agent of influence. She sought to be an agent of influence. She wasn't, according to them, she was not a spy. Now, that's why I think she is now taking a case against MI5 for what they did to her and her company. But
she did.
That's not the issue here. The issue here is about Prince Andrew, isn't it? Sorry?
She did hand over 600 grand, though. But but I'm asking about this.
Let's be absolutely clear. Very clear, Camilla, because I've already sued one media company successfully on this.
Yes.
I did not take a penny personally from Christine Lee.
No, I know. I'm saying she paid.
No, but let's be clear. She paid for people who were doing work which was for the benefit of my constituents and for the country.
Sure.
Okay, she paid them. The case that we're looking at with the Conservative, the China Research Group, which was set up by Tom Tugendhat, a defense minister, and by Alicia Cairns, who was the secretary of, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. They were paying those two who have now been charged under the Official Secrets Act. So there's a huge difference. And yet, you know, it seems to be that it go on.
I'm trying to, because the point I'm trying to make here, Barry, is it's tricky, this. I appreciate exactly what you're saying about who she's given the 600 grand to, as opposed to this new case. But you aren't sure still. She's fighting the case in court. You aren't sure whether she is a Chinese spy, as was alleged. We've got a situation where the Duke of York said they had no idea.
I am clear that the Home Secretary at the time said that she was not being accused of spying. She was accused of trying to use influence. And it was not illegal. Nothing that she did, as far as I understand, and as far as the Home Secretary at the time, Priti Patel, understood, was illegal at all. It was all also for the benefit of the public good. She giving to pay for people who were working for the public benefit, rather than two people who have now been charged with spying from the Conservative Party, who actually were then paying them. There's a big difference.
I understand. No, I understand. Barry Gardiner, we need to leave it there because we've run out of time. I suppose
I thought we were going to talk about the National Planning Policy Framework. That's what you asked me to talk about.
Barry, unfortunately, technical difficulties meant that you were late to this party, but we will get you back on to talk about that, Mr. Gardiner. Thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. We'll be back in just a minute with that Kemi Badenoch interview. Don't go anywhere.
It's the biggest, greatest Great British giveaway so far, with your chance to win a spectacular £50,000 in tax-free cash. 2025 could be amazing, with plenty of treats, holidays and fun on the horizon. How would you enjoy that cash? £50,000 will make someone our biggest ever winner. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Fabio, thank you for coming in. It's great to see you.
Nice to meet you.
So you were born near Rome?
Yeah, in a very small town. It's called Serrone, about an hour south of Rome. Yeah, on the hillside.
Was it a place of excellent cuisine?
It is indeed a place of excellent cuisine and red wines. In fact, it's the only DOCG red wine of the region. Yeah.
Most of your career, I mean, this may seem self-evident, you've cooked Italian. I'm thinking that's quite a challenge to cook Italian in Malaysia, to cook Italian in Bermuda or Turkey. Was that a challenge?
It was, yeah, but I like challenges, so that's one of the reasons why I started to travel, because of my job. For example, in Malaysia, I've been sent there to twist a grill restaurant into an Italian restaurant inside a 5-star hotel. And I was doing the chef training for the local chefs. And then I build the menus, I train the chefs, and then I eventually go back.
In Italian food, is there lots of innovation?
I would say in the past 10 years, yes. It used to be a very traditional cuisine, but in the past 10, 15 years, Italian chefs, they are a bit more open-minded, I would say.
Give us some examples of your innovation.
Well, hide and seek is very well around the innovation. In that bar is a bar and kitchen where we have a sherry plate concept, where we try to take our guests in a culinary journey, starting from a classic dish and then reinventing to a modern twist. Usually I like to twist the style of cuisine between different countries, different continents.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Lots more still to come this morning. My exclusive interview with Conservative Party leader Camilla Badenoch is coming up next. I'm also going to be speaking to Reform UK's chairman, Zia Youssef, and the historian Alexander Larman, who's got a great documentary out about the relationship between George VI and indeed Edward VIII in the run-up to that abdication crisis. We were going to have Sam Francis reading the news, but I think that's going to be delayed until a little later so that we can get the full thrust of my interview with the Conservative leader, Camilla Badenoch. She sat down with me for an exclusive interview after she returned from her trip to the US. I spoke to her at her office in Westminster, and here's the first part of our interview.
Camilla Badenoch, thank you very much for joining me on my GB News show this morning. Lovely to see you. So you addressed the International Democracy Union Conference in America, in Washington, in fact, where you said this: "I believe my party lost because it spent a lot of time talking right but governing left." Are you in danger, though, of talking down your party too much to the electorate?
No. I think it is important that we acknowledge where we went wrong. Pretending that we didn't lose or that the electorate was wrong, in my view, would not be how we win back the public's trust. When I stood for party leader, I said the first thing we needed to do was to show that we could be trusted again. So not just making new promises or throwing out new policies, but explaining to the public where we went wrong, but not just where we went wrong, but why things went wrong. Because if you don't look at the why, you'll repeat the same mistakes. And that's what that speech was drawing out, why things are going wrong.
The GB News audience will think that you went wrong in 3 specific areas. You went wrong on tax because the tax burden became the biggest since the Second World War, and they appreciate COVID's role in that, but they will think it was distinctly unconservative. They'll think that you went wrong in your net zero pledges, which are now coming back to bite us all, not least with the closure of the car plant at the Vauxhall car plant in Luton. But predominantly, they will say that you went wrong on immigration. And that's why you have struggled at Prime Minister's questions to tackle Keir Starmer on immigration, because everybody knows that this was 14 years of Tory failure.
So let's start off with net zero. You will remember that when the net zero pledges were announced, I was one of only 2 MPs who actually said, what are we doing? Where is the plan? We believe that we need to make sure we give a good environment for the next generation, but that needs to be done in a way that doesn't bankrupt the country. And one of the things that people know I did was fight in government to hold back many of the plans, which even business and others were saying, yes, it's fine, we'll do this, we'll just get stuff from China. And I think that shows how I think about things. I tell people that I'm an engineer, you've got to have a proper plan, not just make promises and then hope things will work themselves out later. On tax, as you mentioned, yes, we had COVID, but we are also spending so much more. And there's a difficult conversation to be had about what the state needs to spend money on. It's not just about public services. And we all saw what happened a couple of years ago when Liz Truss tried to remove taxes without removing, to reduce taxes without reducing spending. Those are some of the things that we're going to be working on over the next few years. But on immigration, I'm not going to run away from the subject of immigration. I never have. Labour are pretending that they're tough on immigration when actually they stopped us from doing quite a lot of things. It wasn't just the fact that we had a majority in the Commons. We did not have a majority in the Lords. So a lot of legislation, the Rwanda legislation, even when we were putting it through, it was getting blocked elsewhere. So I'm not going to have Keir Starmer, who wanted foreign criminals to stay in this country, actively stop them from being deported, pretend that he is Mr. Immigration. Yes, we got things wrong. We tried to deliver a points-based system when we left the EU. We tried to deliver a points-based system. It clearly did not work. So let's fix that. But we were not the ones making all of those applications, but we were not keeping an eye on the ball. And that is where I will say that we got things wrong. But we are the only party that understands why this system is broken. And so we are the only party that can fix immigration.
Because the trouble was, I think John Reid back in the day when he was a Labour Home Secretary said that the Home Office was a basket case. And even post that, you know, the rest of the Labour administration into successive Conservative governments. I appreciate what you're saying about stopping the boats and indeed the deterrent that the Rwanda plan may well have been. But it's the concern about legal migration. We've seen it even this week with Labour addressing the housing shortage with the pledge of 1.5 million homes. The GB audience feels terribly let down by the Conservatives not keeping a lid on legal migration. Those pledges, tens of thousands, everyone remembers it from David Cameron onwards. So it's how are you going to manoeuvre the Tories out of that? Because you can't attack Labour on legal migration. You're as bad as they are.
I'm afraid that is not true. Yes, we can. And that is by pointing to people all the things that we did do that did make a difference. I'm not here to say that everything worked out, but I need to make sure that people know the truth about what actually happened. When we were cracking down on migration, do you remember people attacking Theresa May about the go-home vans? Do you remember them attacking her about the hostile environment? When we were being very serious, people got spooked. The problem we have is that when anyone actually tries to manage migration, they get attacked. And that spooks a lot of people, some politicians, not me, I'm not worried about that. A lot of people in the Home Office, you see them even putting on their message boards that they don't want to do this. A Director General from the Home Office left to go work for Amnesty International, you know, to help asylum seekers. That's great, but that's charity work. That's not controlling borders work. And that is why I keep telling people that we are the only party who has seen the system from the inside and understand how to fix it. Labour don't want to fix it. Reform can't fix it. They don't know how. Goodness knows what the Libyans are thinking.
We'll get on to reform in a moment. You have moved, I think, during the leadership campaign, you didn't want to go as far as to say that you wanted to put a cap on migration, but you are now saying that. Is that an accurate representation?
Yes, what I said during the leadership contest, that a cap on its own is not enough, that numbers matter, so yes, a cap, but culture matters more. Who is coming into the country? How are we integrating them? How are we making sure that the people who come to this country care about it? This is not a hostel, it's not a dormitory, this is our home, and then making sure that the leadership follows through. So a cap is something that we can do. What I don't do is just make random promises without explaining where it's all going to come from. So I've said that a cap will be needed, but what is that cap going to be? Let's work out what we can sustain. We're going to need to have a very systemic review. How many homes should we be building? What makes sense? What is happening to our population? Where do we need skills? And make sure that migration is controlled. Where the points-based system went wrong was that we thought by putting in those points, it would be fine. I campaigned, in fact, in 2018, before we left the EU, where we couldn't manage our borders, that let's have skilled migration and not cap that, because that's what my constituents were telling me. The businesses in my constituency said, we can't get high-skilled people, can you help? And I did that. But when we saw that it wasn't working, I said, no, this is not good enough. We've got to do better. Let's change things. Let's start talking about what the courts are doing. So we can do a lot on immigration if we're given the chance, but the first thing we need to do is earn trust. And that is why, no matter how tough it is, I will make sure that I hold the Prime Minister to account on immigration at PMQs. We are the opposition, and we've got a job to do, and I'm going to make sure that we do that job.
So you don't want to put the number on the cap now?
Well, what would that number mean?
Well, you tell me exactly. Well, let's use a comparison, because the OBR and the IFS seem to be baking in this idea that legal migration can remain at around 350,000 a year. We saw that record high in the end of 2023, up to 950,000, which I think everybody can agree is way, way too high. But that base number seems to be creeping up and up.
Exactly.
So is 350,000 too many?
So what I'm saying is that we need to work out what the country can sustain and where people are coming from. If we start saying, oh, well, we'll just do tens of thousands, like David Cameron said in 2010, and then it doesn't work out, people think that we are being dishonest. Let's explain where the number comes from. Let's explain why. And that is work that needs to be done. No one ever does this work. Even the OBR, where it's picking its figures from, that's not a serious systemic analysis of what to do.
What does your gut tell you about 350,000?
My gut tells me that immigration right now is too high. My gut tells me that immigration even 10 years ago is probably too high with no integration strategy. But we are living in an era of global mass migration. It is not just the UK. I've been to Italy, I've been to Australia, I've been to the US, Germany. Everybody is having these problems. We have to think about how we deal with this new world problem. This problem did not start because of Conservatives. It's happening everywhere. We were in government when it started. We've got to figure it out. Otherwise, we will lose control completely. And I do not want to see that happen. I will do everything I can to make sure that that does not happen.
One dividing line between you and your former opponent, Robert Jenrick, was that he said he wanted to commit to leaving the ECHR, and you said you wanted to have a further think about it. Where are you on that right now?
So I have said that leaving the ECHR is not a silver bullet. We need to remember that we've just had a historic defeat. Labour has almost 4 times as many MPs as we do. They have a supermajority. It doesn't matter what policies we rush out with now. Even if 100 Labour MPs disappeared, they would still be in government. That is the reality. So me talking about what we'll do now when we haven't done our homework is not realistic. I keep telling people I'm an engineer. If you want a plan, you don't just talk, you build, you think, you analyze, and then people can see how it comes together. So on the ECHR, I've said that it alone will not fix anything. If we leave the ECHR today, we're still not going to be deporting people. You've got to deal with the personnel problem. You look at Labour, you look at Keir Starmer, there are people like that all over this country. They're not going to man the borders. Let's get new people in who want to do this job. There's a lot of thinking to be done, and that's what I'm going to be doing over the next few years.
You can accept for the GB audience that it's more attractive, if you're really concerned about immigration, to look at Nigel Farage promising net zero migration with exceptions for healthcare and other key sectors, and departing from the ECHR on day one.
What I would say to GB News viewers is, aren't you tired of people who just make promises without telling you how they're going to get them, if I may, without telling you how they're going to get them done? I remember watching clips of Nigel Farage saying that he wanted to see more immigration from Africa, he wanted to see more immigration from India. He's not saying that anymore. If he was an MP, there'd be clips of him saying these things. We are people who are serious. When we make mistakes, we acknowledge them. Labour pretends it doesn't make mistakes. Mr. Farage is talking, but he does not have the experience. We do. So what I'm saying to your viewers is there is only one party that has the experience, that knows what went wrong and knows how to solve this, and that's the Conservatives.
Well, there you have it. Much more to come from my interview with Kemi next, including what she makes of President-elect Trump, the threat from Reform UK, and what she hopes to do as Tory leader. Do not move a muscle. This is the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
So maybe people are opting for the more traditional ways of meeting people. Meeting organically.
It's the only way to actually... Well, I know some people have
it's worked very well for some people. I mean, I personally think that doing things more organically is probably going to be better, or is more to my taste. It has worked well for lots of people.
So I absolutely agree. There's a very interesting young woman, she's about 22, who writes on this and has a podcast called Freya India. And she talks about this dating industry, and she said all she ever wanted to do as a teenager was go down the pub and meet a man and fall in love. And the dating apps just don't do that. And she said they've become so, it's just literally people looking for sex. We need to get back to traditional ways of meeting face to face, but we also need to stop toxifying it. A man flirting with a woman is not toxic. Men and women have done this for years. Obviously, we need to know about boundaries, but we also need to allow men and women to do what comes naturally.
I think it's also about spontaneity in society. It's much harder to, just randomly go out in an evening in London and not know what you're doing and have a good time than it was, I think, 15 years ago or so. Yeah, and if you don't have spontaneity in your life in general terms, then that spontaneous meeting with someone is less likely.
Also, I think it's also where you are, because I was just thinking, as you said, that London, going out to try and meet someone in London is one thing. If you live in a small town and you go down your local pub, there's probably you're more likely to meet someone that you get to know over a period of time.
But this is also why we need to support our pubs and our hospitality areas, because they are important social integrators. They really are.
Yeah. GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. More from my interview with Kemi Badenoch now. We discuss what she makes of Donald Trump and JD Vance, and I asked her if a pact with Nigel Farage might be on the cards. Here's what she had to say.
We will get on to Farage and reform again a bit later, but tell me about your trip to the US. So you also met with Conservative former leaders, including former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott. You met with Pierre Poilievre, who is hoping to defeat Justin Trudeau at the next election in Canada. You also met with Vice President-elect JD Vance. What kind of conversations did you have with them?
So Tony Abbott, I've known for a while, and he actually endorsed me in the run-up to in the leadership contest. And he was talking about bringing back more authentic conservatism. He is a net zero skeptic, as am I. I know that climate change is happening. I believe that we need to look after our environment. I am suspicious of the net zero plans that Ed Miliband has. I even thought our plans were going too far. Thankfully, we were able to row back on that. So we talked a lot about that. Pierre Poilievre, I thought, was amazing. He is so impressive, and he is about 4 years ahead of me in terms of where he is in the electoral cycle. He is the leader of the Conservative Party in Canada, but he's in opposition, and he is part of what I see as a new generation of Conservatives who are coming forwards. We're not the past. We've taken our principles from, previous Conservatives, but we need to mold those principles for the age that we're in. The world is changing, and that's the conversation that I had at dinner with JD Vance, who he was messaging me during our election, and I was doing the same, about how people don't understand how the world is changing. And we often have, a lot of media commentary about, oh, Kamala Harris is going to win, and your opponent is going to win. People talking you down without actually looking at what you're saying. Conservatives constantly being caricatured. And I want to make sure that people understand what it is that we're about, what we believe in, because if you vote for a party, it's got to be because there's an emotional connection, not just because of promises. People need to know that you are for them. And that's what I'm offering right now. The Conservative Party is under new leadership. And what I'm doing is showing that we are based on principles that the rest of the country shares. Belief in freedom, in genuine citizenship, not just passport citizenship, in the importance of family, in equality under the law, not dividing people into groups, and all of this left-wing nonsense that we see. And I'm going to keep pushing that.
Have you had a conversation yet with Donald Trump?
No.
And, well, how would you like to develop that relationship with the man who's going to be president for the second time come January?
Well, I'm quite excited about what a Trump presidency will bring. I'm someone who's been writing endlessly about how we are becoming more bureaucratic as a country, rather than entrepreneurial. I've written papers, I've given speeches on this, and Doge is basically what I have been talking about. Javier Milei in Argentina also has this thesis that the Western world has just become bogged down in compliance and bureaucracy. So it'll be interesting to see how President Trump gets on with Doge and with those plans, because that's what I want to do. It's what I've always wanted to do, even as business secretary, when I put out papers on smarter regulation and I cut, audit regulations. These are things that we can do in order to get our economy booming again.
Now, with that guise, and in that guise of being former business secretary and trade secretary, do you think that it is possible for the UK and the US to strike a trade deal? How could that work?
Well, we are entering CPTPP, which is the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Deal with Asian countries, but also Canada, Mexico, Australia. And it's going to be amazing. We should be striking more free trade agreements. We have one with the EU. It is working well, but the US would be the big prize. And when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, we had been negotiating. We were halfway through negotiations when Boris Johnson and President Trump were both running the respective countries. When Biden came in, that got scrapped, so we had to put those plans on the shelf. Right now, with a new Trump presidency, what Keir Starmer should be doing is chasing that US free trade agreement, and we will certainly be pushing for that.
And do you not worry that that might be a further blow to British farmers who might be worried about the import of much cheaper American meat? We know they're already on their knees. We saw them at the tractor protest again this week in Westminster. It could be a blow if Conservatives don't seem to be standing up for people working in the British countryside.
We will always stand up for farmers. And actually, if you look at the CPTPP deal, which I negotiated, the NFU said this is a great deal. Because it's not just about food coming in, it's also about the ability to export our food more cheaply. If you have tariffs, then you can't sell your food abroad. And we need to be able to make sure that we get our food into the markets across the world because it's of the highest quality. The key thing is to make sure that you sign a deal that works for both countries, not one that is lopsided. And I think that only Conservatives will do that. There is a lot that we can share. Trade deals are mostly about services these days rather than just goods. We are an 80% services economy. That's where a lot of our growth will come from. But we will always protect British farmers. I have said that we're going to reverse the family farms tax. I think that this is important that people understand why farmers are special. They really are. There's no other job like this. You don't just find farmers at the job centre. Once they go, it's very, very difficult to bring back what it is that's been lost.
Some of the farmers were upset that you didn't mention their plight at PMQs this week. They were in Parliament at the time. They could hear what was going on. Equally, have you ceded sort of the argument in favour of farmers to Nigel Farage? He's in the middle of it all in his wellies. Jeremy Clarkson's also been a poster boy for the farmers. That should be your role, shouldn't it?
Yes, but I was on the stage at the first rally with Jeremy Clarkson, and everybody wrote about that. I've also mentioned farmers at every other PMQs. So just this once, when people said, oh, why isn't she talking about immigration? I talked about immigration, and people said, why aren't you talking about farmers? You only get 6 questions at PMQs. And I wanted to make sure that Keir Starmer understood that if he wants to talk about immigration and attack us, I will drag his record out so that people can see that he was on the side of criminals, not the people of the United Kingdom. And one of the other things is that the farming campaign is not yet over. There's a lot more that we will be doing, because these are constituencies which we have always supported and which we always will.
How are you finding PMQs?
It's very different from being on the other side. I'm used to answering questions, so asking questions for me is limiting. I want to ask more and more. And what was really interesting about my conversation with Pierre Poilievre was that he does Prime Minister's questions as well, because the Canadian system is like ours. But he gets 24 questions, and it's just him rather than all the backbenchers. I said, I'd love 24. And he said, I couldn't do anything with just 6 questions, that you're just getting going with 6 questions. So it's a tricky thing to do, to make sure that you can tell a story with 6 questions. But what I want at PMQs is for people to understand the difference between Conservatives and Labour. For too long, people didn't understand what the difference between us was. I think that was wrong. We are very different parties, and it is time that the British public understood what real, authentic conservatism looks like.
Are you taking the fight to Starmer enough? Only because some people have remarked in Conservative circles, you've got this reputation for being a bit of a street fighter. You've said yourself you're extremely direct. And is there a sense to which you're slightly playing Queensberry rules across the dispatch box, and you could be a bit more aggressive? Not least because, let's be honest, the Prime Minister's been on the ropes for some time.
Yes, he has been on the ropes. But I need to make sure that I am building the case for Conservatives. People think I like a fight. I don't like a fight, but I will defend our values. I am somebody who fights for other people. I speak up for others. I don't just rush out attacking for attacking's sake. And, if you look at the questions that we've asked, it's about all of those business that are being crushed by the national insurance charges. It is about farmers, who we've just spoken about. It's about pensioners who are suffering under what Rachel Reeves has done with her budget, taking away winter fuel. So I fight for people. I don't just attack Starmer for attacking sake. I think we need to make sure that we show whose side we're on, not just turn it into an argy-bargy.
But are you in danger of being in a kind of sandwich, goodness me, what a way to describe it, between Keir Starmer and indeed Nigel Farage? Reform have seemed to have the momentum lately, pardon the expression, because that's associated with left-wing Labour politics. But you've had the defection of Tim Montgomery, the founder of Con Home, somebody that you and I are both very familiar with in right-wing circles. You've had the defection of Nick Candy, who has got quite a few bob. He's going to now donate to Reform rather than the Conservatives. You've got Elon Musk, the ex and Tesla owner, talking about maybe giving $100 million to Reform. And you've got Nigel Farage, very, very prominent on social media. He's just clocked up, I think, his millionth TikTok supporter. Dame Andrea Jenkins has gone across. There's talk about Suella Braverman, or at least her husband, following. The momentum does seem to be with Reform and not the Tories. And people are talking about the Tories facing this existential crisis.
Right. So let's take each of those in turn. Tim Montgomery has left the party before. He left in 2016. You talked about Nick Candy. He defected to Labour in February and has now gone to Reform. Technically, he's a Labour defection. Andrea Jenkins, I'm sure if you've seen comments that she'd made, they were very personal about me. So I think it's just a personality decision. She just doesn't like who the leader is. I'm who I'm always going to be, and I'm very proud of who I am. But we need to remember that I've been in charge for 5 weeks. And we are taking a party that has been in government for 14 years. It's going to take time. The assumption that after 14 years, we're just going to, just put a lick of paint on it and say, ta-da, it's not going to be like that. It's going to be a long slog. I am here for the long haul. I'm not here just to make a few quick speeches and throw gimmicks out. People won't believe it. People need to know that they can trust us. And what they want to see is someone being a credible and effective opposition, making sure that I'm standing up for Conservative values and those people, farmers, pensioners, small businessmen, all those people who've been hurt by Labour's budget, but also rebuilding our institution. I am about the institution of the Conservative Party. Nigel Farage is an individual personality. He doesn't even have a membership organisation.
Well, they're saying they've got 100,000 members now, and that they might overtake the Tories.
They say that, but what can they do as members? My members have a say. They're part of the organisation. I have to look after them. They're not my fan club. They are people that I have a responsibility to. We are a serious institution. Yes, we have come out of a historic defeat. We're going to have to pick ourselves up. But that's not going to happen in 5 weeks or 5 months. It's going to take the full time in opposition.
Final question. You said in your speech to the IDU that there's no cavalry coming, there's just us. David Frost talked about the need for the right to unite. Because if Reform and the Tories don't come to some kind of deal or pact eventually, you know what's going to happen. Labour will ride on through the middle and win a second term in office, which nobody on the right wants. So further down the track, I appreciate this is a marathon, not a sprint. Don't conversations need to be taking place between the Tories and Reform?
Well, I think it is important that you ensure that your identity is very clear. We have had a period where even within the Conservative Party, there has been a lot of disagreement. These are the things that I'm working through. You can see that we're more united than ever. But when you have had internal disagreement, the first thing you don't do is bring in a whole other bunch of people and say, well, why don't we merge with them? And also, the public want to know what they're voting for. There are a lot of people who vote Conservative who will not vote Conservative if we merge with Reform. We need to be the very best Conservative Party, not trying to nick bits of here or there. In the same way that I wouldn't be talking to Ed Davey and saying, well, there's some people who vote Lib Dem who might vote Conservative, why don't we merge? I won't do the same with Nigel Farage. I haven't been elected as leader of the Conservative Party to do a deal with Nigel Farage. I have been elected as the leader to fix this Conservative Party and get us back to where we were as the champion of Conservative values, and that's what I'm going to do.
Kemi Badenoch, thank you very much indeed for your time today.
Thank you.
Fighting talk there from Kemi Badenoch. Thank you to the opposition leader for sitting down with me earlier this week. Coming up next and reacting to what she had to say is the chairman of Reform UK, Zia Youssef. He'll be in the studio live shortly. Don't go anywhere.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast on the Met Office. Unfortunately, it's a return to the grey and gloomy skies for most of us today. Wettest of the weather will be across parts of Scotland, but for all of us, it will be feeling a good deal milder than it has been of late. So we really start the day rather grey. Best of any brightness really right throughout the day will be across many eastern areas, where the further west you are, greater chance of seeing some rain, especially for parts of Scotland, where this rain will turn increasingly heavy and persistent later on across the northwest. But with the winds coming in from the Atlantic, as I said, a mild feeling day. Could see highs reaching up to 12 or 13 degrees in a few spots. So we end Sunday afternoon very grey across many parts of England and Wales. There will be still a few glimmers of sunshine, but they'll be very fleeting if they do occur. A risk of some spots of rain across the moors, the mountains of Wales, especially for the Pennines and the mountains of Northern Ireland too. But the main bulk of the rain really will be across parts of western and northwestern Scotland, where it will be heavy and persistent, combined with a strengthening wind. So quite a wet and windy end to Sunday across parts of Scotland. Further south, as we go through the course of the night, remaining fairly quiet. Still a risk of some spots of rain across any high ground, some hill fog too, making it a rather murky night in places. But with the cloud cover and the winds coming in from the west, it's going to be another mild night. Temperatures in most towns and cities holding up into high single figures. As we move into Monday, I'm hopeful we will see a little bit more in the way of brightness. The wind's a bit more stronger, so that hopefully will break up some of the cloud as we go through the course of the day. So some sunshine around, but for the far north of Scotland, this rain band really not going far at all during the course of the day. Warnings are in force. Could see some very heavy rainfall in places. Further south in the sunshine, feeling mild. Once again, could see highs reaching 12 or 13 degrees.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player app. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Before we get to Reform UK's chairman, Zia Youssef, your news headlines with Sam Francis.
Camilla, thank you very much. Good morning to you. 32 minutes past 10. Well, leading the news this morning, Labour has claimed a record pace for removing migrants from the UK, but channel crossings are still at an all-time high. The Home Office says nearly 13,500 people have been removed since Labour's election win in July. That is the most in any six-month period since 2019. However, the number of channel crossings continues to rise, with now over 21,000 migrants arriving by small boat, including a record 609 on Thursday alone. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper says Labour is intensifying border security and cracking down on illegal working, but the Conservatives argue Labour is failing to control our borders. Well, next year, body-worn cameras and fingerprint kits will be rolled out to boost enforcement on the borders. Reform UK says it is ready to name an alleged Chinese spy linked to Prince Andrew, defying a court order to keep his identity secret. Nigel Farage and senior MPs are urging his name to be revealed in Parliament, calling it a matter of public interest. The businessman, known as H6, was banned from the UK in 2023 after being deemed a national security threat by the then Home Secretary Suella Braverman. It's claimed H6 met former Prime Ministers David Cameron and Theresa May and kept photos of their meetings in his London office. Well, the Duke of York says he has cut ties with the individual after the government concerns were raised. Just bring you some breaking news getting into us from northwest London this morning, where we are hearing a woman in her 40s has been killed in what police are describing as a shocking and horrific shooting in Brent. Two men were also injured in that incident. One, we believe, is in a critical condition in hospital, while the other did manage to escape with non-life-threatening wounds. Police were called to the scene in Brent around 9:15 last night, but despite their efforts, the woman sadly died at the scene. No arrests, the Met Police say, have been made so far, and detectives are urgently appealing for witnesses to help track down those behind that attack. 8 people have been injured after a double-decker bus collided with a railway bridge in Glasgow. Footage shows the vehicle wedged under the bridge on Cook Street with part of its roof ripped off. One person is still in a critical condition. 5 others were rushed to Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. Emergency services were called to the scene around 6 p.m. on Saturday, with police launching an immediate investigation. Roads were closed overnight and motorists have been urged to avoid the area as police inquiries continue. In other news, water bills are set to rise by 20% to fix Britain's broken sewage system, adding around £100 to the average household bill over the next 5 years. The Environment Secretary Steve Reed admits the hikes will anger families, he says, but that they are essential to repair years of neglect and prevent water rationing within 15 years. The regulator Ofwat is expected to approve the increases this week, with some providers pushing for even steeper rises, some of up to 84%. Well, the government says the extra money will be ring-fenced for fixing pipes and building reservoirs, with any unused funds refunded to customers. New laws are also being introduced to force water bosses to report any sewage leaks, with tough penalties for non-compliance. The Environment Secretary's push for net zero could see historic homes fitted with heat pumps and solar panels. Ed Miliband's plan would require all heritage buildings to have energy efficiency certificates, graded on measures like heat pumps and smart meters. Critics, though, fear proposals could force owners of listed homes to install upgrades that might damage their character. The government, though, says the changes are vital to meet climate targets. Turning to international news, and the fall of Bashar Assad has left Syria reportedly littered with explosives. posing a deadly threat to returning families, especially to children. That's according to the Halo Trust, with a report saying that tenfold surge in calls about landmines and unexploded bombs has been received since last weekend's collapse of the Assad regime. A heat map has revealed millions of dangerous munitions contaminating cities, towns and farmland, with vast areas still unassessed. The charity's also warning families to remain vigilant, urging parents to limit their children's movements in war-torn areas. It's calling for urgent international support to clear Syria's deadly legacy and make communities safe again. And the Prime Minister is heading to Norway and Estonia from today until Tuesday, focusing on clean energy, trade and security ties there. In Norway, he'll be meeting his counterpart with discussions set to spotlight NATO cooperation, Ukraine and climate goals, including a long-standing partnership in carbon capture. Well, the UK remains Norway's top export market, with trade in fish and energy, metals and others surpassing £25 billion last year. Both leaders are expected to emphasise strengthening jobs and cutting emissions through joint green projects. And then from Norway, Sir Keir Starmer will continue his diplomatic tour, heading to Estonia. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'll be back with you for a full roundup at 11 o'clock. Now, though, it's back to Camilla.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thanks, Sam. I'm joined now by the Chairman of Reform UK, Zia Youssef. Lovely to see you this morning. Thank you for coming into the GB News studio. You watched the Kemi Badenoch interview. What's your reaction?
Well, something that has afflicted the Tories now for a long time is to really insult the British electorate's intelligence. People watching that interview must have been amazed to hear, for example, that the Tories should now be trusted on immigration because they have experience in immigration. That's like an arsonist turning up at your house, which is ablaze, demanding the opportunity to put it out on the basis that they had the experience of starting it. The Tories, in manifesto after manifesto, promised to bring net migration to tens of thousands, left office with that number at almost 1 million. The Tories are the ones who brought net zero legislation into being, enshrined it into law. She claimed in that interview that she was the one standing up to net zero legislation. Go and look at the records. Just last year, she voted for the Energy Act, which Claire Coutinho, the net zero secretary, remember it was the Tories who introduced the net zero secretary in the first place, she called it the most significant energy legislation in the country's history. Kemi Badenoch voted for it. Okay. So the idea that she was some lone voice protesting against the disastrous policies that the Tories implemented, that's nonsense. She was in the cockpit with a hand on the throttle, chartering a course towards the cliff edge. All right.
So her counter reaction to that will no doubt be, look, we were in office and you can try and do things like the Reform Party have in their contract with the people to have net zero migration, for instance. Actually, in practice, that proves quite difficult when you've got people in the healthcare sector and indeed hospitality saying you can't have net zero migration, it won't work because we need staff from overseas to fund our businesses. And then equally, you could say that because you haven't got any experience of governing, you've just really been a campaign party, that reality will hit you firmly when you get into office and realise that the civil service and the so-called blob is trying to pull against everything that you try and do.
Well, this is once again the Tories propagating the lie that is told to British people time and again that they have to put up with open borders and an exploding population, otherwise the health service would collapse. You could replace every single doctor and nurse in the National Health Service with 6 months of last year's net migration. And on top of that, if you actually look at the numbers on net non-EU migration over the last 6 years, of which there were 3.1 million people who arrived illegally, just 16% of those people arrived on work visas. Yeah. This is a complete lie. And it's the reason why Kemi Badenoch can never hold Keir Starmer to account on immigration, because we all know that their record was a disaster and they lied to the British public time and again.
Although she's right to point out on immigration that Nigel Farage was once advocating more immigration from Commonwealth countries like India and indeed African countries to replace free movement of people across the EU.
Nigel has been in politics for 3 decades. Nigel was not in government. He was not in the cabinet, as I said, with his hand on the throttle, chartering a course for this country towards the cliff edge. I want to say one other thing as well. To be fair to Kemi Badenoch, whoever the Tory leader is, there is a physics problem, an insoluble physics problem at the heart of the Conservative Party. Half of the party are basically Lib Dems, and poll after poll shows this. We all know it's true. And the other half are small C Conservatives that basically agree with us. Many are now realising that and joining us. You know, these are people like Tim Montgomery. I encourage anyone watching this who is in that situation, please come to your senses and come join us, because we are reconstituting the centre-right of politics in this country. But the reality is, no matter who the leader is of the Conservative Party, they will always have to put the majority of their cognitive capacity into just remaining as leader. One of the reasons why Kemi Badenoch, for example, refused during the leadership campaign to commit to leaving the ECHR like Robert Jenrick did was, of course, it's not the silver bullet, and it is, but it is a necessary, albeit insufficient, step. The reason she wouldn't do it, to use her own words, was it would divide her party.
All right. So is Reform's solution then to just get rid of people that Nigel doesn't agree with, like Ben Habib?
What Reform's policy is we have a leader who everyone is behind. He is almost universally popular amongst our members. That's actually really important, because not only will Nigel become Prime Minister, he will become Prime Minister with hundreds of MPs who are under no uncertain terms as to why they've been elected, with a clear mandate to fix the problems the country has. We are not going to spend all of our time fighting amongst ourselves like the Tories. If people want a government to constantly try to tear each other down, you end up with a disastrous government like the ones that we've had with the Tories for 14
Reform
years.
hasn't been without its infighting, let's put it that way.
Nigel has almost universal support amongst our members. Our MPs.
Is the membership a fan club?
I think if you were Kemi Badenoch, you would give a limb to have the sort of support that Nigel has amongst our supporters. Why? Because people know what he stands for, they know what he believes in, and he knows, and our members, and increasingly now the voters, that's why we're now polling second in many polls across the country at all-time highs. The reason is because people trust Nigel when it comes to crucial issues like immigration.
And how about Nick Candy? She's right to say that he did endorse the Labour Party back in February, and now he's backing reform. So it's not a Tory defection, is it?
Nick Candy said, after 14 years of Tory rule and being utterly betrayed, as he said, a total betrayal of the wealth creators like him in this country, it was probably time for a change. He also said, we don't yet know anything about Labour's policies. And now we do. To be clear, Nick Candy never joined the Labour Party. He never took a position in Labour Party. So, again, it's just a total misrepresentation of reality.
Like Tim Montgomery, just a bit politically fickle. Just maybe go where the mood is going.
I think that does somebody like Tim an enormous disservice. This is a man who was the founder of Conservative Home. He's a man of great integrity, and we're very proud that he's part of Reform.
I'm very fond of Tim Montgomery, but I'm just saying he has got a history of sort of leaving parties and going to in other directions.
He was a Tory party member for 33 years.
All right, fair enough. How about this idea of Elon Musk giving the party $100 million? Can we just get some clarity on this? Where did this story come from? Must have come from someone in Reform, mustn't it? How did it end up on the front page of the Sunday Times? Because everyone seems to be disowning it. Oh, we don't know where this has come from. Oh, where could it have come from, Mr. Yusuf?
Well, I'm not privy to the Sunday Times sources. I can tell you categorically it would not have come from us. It's not our style to do that sort of thing. But what's clear is Elon Musk is somebody who is, I don't think there's any doubt anymore, he's the greatest entrepreneur of all time.
Indeed. Is he
he's a big advocate for free speech. Well, let's see. Look, he's clearly been very clear in his endorsement.
So he might be giving you $100 million.
Well, who knows? Who knows what Elon might do in the future?
What conversations have you had? Tell us. How much money has he given?
I have not had any conversations myself
Who's he been speaking to Nigel?
Elon Musk. Yeah, of course, Nigel has spoken with him, but that's partly because Nigel is, in my view, the man who is closest to the incoming president of the United States. Elon Musk played a crucial role in getting him elected, and Elon is obsessed with ensuring that the values that we care deeply about, things like freedom of speech, for example, persist, and that's why the X platform was so important. It's why he bought it, and it's why he supports us.
All right, I'm really interested in this because I think it could be transformative for Reform's fortunes. So, what's the probability that Elon Musk is going to give you tens of millions of quid?
I can't price that probability because I have no idea. You'd have to ask him about that.
But is it pie in the sky? Is there something in it? Is there definitely something in it?
I think, given he is worth $460 billion, he owns many companies, and he could not have been clearer on social media very clearly that he's endorsed Nigel. He thinks reform government is necessary to turn this country around and to save it. He has a huge soft spot for Britain, just like President Trump does. I wouldn't be surprised. But to be clear, I'm not speculating on a donation. I'm not in touch with him about that. It would be inappropriate for me to do so.
All right, so more likely than not to give you a wedge of cash.
I'm not going to say that. As I said, he supports Nigel. He's an extraordinarily wealthy man. We would welcome a donation from him, but that's up to him.
All right, if he does give you some money, you can come on GB News and tell us all about it.
All right, I will.
Zia Youssef, thank you very much indeed for joining me in the
for having
studio
me.
this morning. Coming up next, we're going to be discussing all things royal with the author Alexander Larman, who's here to talk about his documentary about George VI's rather difficult relationship with his brother Edward VIII. And, of course, we'll talk about the Duke of York's role in that Chinese spying scandal. Don't move a muscle. Back in 3.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Christmas canapé offers partygoers a small treat that staves off hunger and soaks up the fizz. Founder and host of Crazy Sexy Food, Hannah Harley-Young, joins me now with a toothsome selection. Lovely to see you, Hannah.
You too.
Origin of the word canapé?
Yes, French. Sort of from the, yeah, of course, from sort of the 1800s. It means sofa. So it's sort of playing on the analogy of someone sitting or lying on a sofa. It is about the garnish, traditionally sitting on a piece of stale bread or pastry. Obviously, it's evolved over the years. I don't have any stale bread for you, don't worry. But the idea is that it's something sort of garnish, something exciting sitting on a vehicle that you can put in your mouth in 1 or 2 bites.
It's obviously post-war. What is it? Is it 60s or 70s? How long have we been eating these things?
I would say around about then. And I think what's interesting, I mean, I always look towards even the 80s, a little bit sort of... later on, where it's where you sort of have that sort of the classic vol au vent, which was, you know, a little bit dry, a little bit tasteless, and I think that's why I've brought a real selection for you to show you how far we've come. Another traditional one, obviously, being your pigs in blankets. I'm going to hold off for a second before I choke. Another thing that I have to say about canapés, there are a few little tips that I must give people super quickly. Make sure they're small. 1 or 2 bites. When you're at a party, you're standing, you've got a glass in one hand, you need to hold it. There. OK, I would have preferred a glass of wine, but, you know, I can't stand these canapés where I have to put the glass down in order to eat the food. I want to do it all at once.
I couldn't agree more. You should never eat more than you can lift.
Exactly.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Historian and author Alexander Larman joins me now to talk about his new documentary on Channel 4, Edward versus George, The Windsors at War. Oh, Windsors at war shock. So this is Edward VIII and George VI, who, let's be honest, were very different people. A lot of sibling rivalry there.
Hi, Camilla. It's lovely to be back.
Lovely to see you.
Well, yes. I mean, I think that with royalty, there's always been an element of sibling rivalry. But obviously what we look at with Edward and George is Edward was charming, he was personable, he was charismatic. George was shy, people thought he was aloof because he wasn't very comfortable with public speaking.
Yeah.
In fact, he had a terrible stutter.
Yes.
And we can see throughout the course of their relationship, and of course what happened after Edward abdicated as king in 1936, and George taking over and leading the country through the Second World War, just how deep the differences in that dynamic ran. Being able to explore that was an utterly fascinating experience.
Really fascinating. Was it true that their father, George V, had always described George VI, despite being, as you say, the stuttering spare to the sort of playboy prince that Edward was, that George V always thought deep down that Bertie, as he was known, would be better as king than Edward.
I think that is true, yes. I mean, he thought that Edward, who obviously became Edward VIII, was going to go off and ruin himself, and that's exactly what he did. Because he saw the tendency in him to be frivolous, he saw the tendency to take up somebody like Wallis Simpson, was what he saw in his younger son, Bertie, was a duty and a dedication to his country. And I think, of course, you can see his choice of wife, Elizabeth Bowes-Lyons, as being absolutely the epitome of that.
Solid as a rock and dependable.
Solid in every way.
And, of course, she hated Wallis Simpson's guts, always blamed her for plunging her stammering husband onto the throne, although he didn't do a bad job after all. Do we think that Harry and Meghan are like the Duke of Windsor and Wallis Simpson?
We can definitely see parallels, can't we? Because obviously there is the sense that Harry is somebody who has left the country in exile. He has this ambitious, scheming American wife. And
Now, Alec, is that the right way to describe Meghan?
I think very ambitious and insanely scheming would be a better way of describing
All right, fair enough. Don't get off the fence there. I can see that you've got very strong opinions. And can we also talk, while you're here, about this Duke of York farrago with this Chinese money being given to him? It's now being investigated by the security services. He says that he's been hoodwinked. I mean, how do you solve a problem like the Duke of York?
Well, I don't know about you, Camilla, but I'm becoming quite fond of the Duke of York.
What, just because he provides good headlines?
Well, he provides comedy. It's like whenever I'm feeling a bit down, I look at the news and, oh, look, things are going worse for the Duke of York.
How can it get any worse for the Duke of York? And then this happens.
Well, I'm expecting to see a picture of him with Putin next.
Well, actually, you know, anything could happen. But does the king need to just say to him, right, that's it now? I know he's lost all of his royal and military ties, but you just must be a private citizen and just be very, very quiet and never appear in public again.
Well, that's what he should do, but he seems reluctant to do so because obviously you've had all the difficulties with his younger son.
Yes.
Do you really want to compound the difficulties by saying to your younger brother, you've got to basically go and live in a council house?
I know, but the Harry problem and the Duke of York problem is related to the same thing, and it's related to your documentary. You know, what do you do with the spare? What happens when there's a spare? It can't be solved, this issue, for the Windsors.
Well, we saw it with Princess Margaret as well. We've always seen the way the royal family seem incapable of looking after its younger members, apart, of course, from Princess Anne.
Ah, Princess Anne.
The wonderful Princess Anne.
I know. Some people wish she was queen.
I wish she was queen.
Good old Princess Anne. And a final question. Shouldn't the King have met Trump in Paris at the Notre Dame unveiling rather than Prince William?
I wonder to what extent that was his own decision, because you can see that the King and Trump are so diametrically opposed in terms of character. That's going to make for a very interesting next 4 years, because William, who can be testy and can be impatient, is a more obviously diplomatic character than the King. And you can imagine that the King would have very strong private opinions about Trump, which perhaps would have translated into his not meeting him.
I mean, it did make William look quite statesmanlike. Also, against the Labour government, he appeared like the only adult in the room. Alexander, your documentary, part 2's out this weekend, isn't it?
We're
just halfway through it, so you can catch up. Obviously, only while you're watching GB News. You can just listen to it in the background because we like you to stick with this channel for obvious reasons. Thank you very much to all of my guests today, including, of course, Camilla Badenoch for that exclusive interview. Don't go anywhere, because up next, it's Michael Portillo.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather update provided by the Met Office. Quite a mild theme to our weather over the coming few days, but also a windy one as well. You'll see on the pressure chart there is a lot of isobars here, meaning some very strong winds around, particularly around parts of the North Yorkshire area. The A1M could provide some quite tricky travelling conditions with gusts of up to 65 miles an hour here, and there's a wind warning in force. Also some gales around coastal areas of Scotland also. Quite cloudy for most of us this afternoon with spots of drizzle in the west, the most persistent rain across areas of western Scotland. But you'll see there that mild theme in place for all of us everywhere in double-digit figures, well above where we'd normally expect to be for this time in December. That theme will generally continue as we head into this evening as well. The cloud really remaining intact for the vast majority of us, quite grey skies into the evening period. Again, those odd spots of drizzle out towards the west just to contend with, but the rain really will be very persistent across parts of western Scotland. Over the next 24, 48 hours, we could see widely half a month's worth of rain falling across parts of the Scottish Highlands, perhaps locally up to 150 millimetres of rain. So some travel disruption is certainly possible, and a rain warning comes into force from this evening, running all the way through until midday on Tuesday, with that